Thanks so much for joining us today. I think this TechTalk will be very interesting, especially for all of us here at Google. I can see just waiting for the talk, everyone had their laptops open and they were checking and staying connected. Not to guilt anyone into closing the laptop. So my name is Caroline. I'm a software engineer here at Google, and I'm part of a team that helps you stay constantly connected to everything. So I feel a little responsibility to also help you stay calm while dealing with all the input that's just flying into you right now. And here to help us with that is Soren Godhammer. So Soren is an entrepreneur, techie, and meditator. He was a project director for Richard Gere's charity Healing the Divide, and he was also the founder of the Lineage Project in New York, which offered stress reduction programs for at-risk and incarcerated teens, which won the Mayor's Voluntary Action Award. He also co-founded Zulio, which creates embeddable widgets to uplift user-generated content. He's an author of several books, including Just Say Om, and he's currently working on his next book titled Wisdom 2.0, Stress Relief for the Creative and Constantly Connected. So here to help us stay stress-free is Soren. So please join me in welcoming him.
Thanks for the introduction. So after working for about 3 years in New York City juvenile halls, teaching meditation and things to incarcerated kids in the Bronx and Harlem, I decided to try something a little more challenging and practice meditation and mindfulness with technology, which I've actually discovered is, as most of you know, as much as I love technology and love to be connected, at times the impact on my health and my well-being becomes such that I'm actually not as productive as I would like to be. And I want to start out by telling a Zen story, because I think there said in the flyer there were going to be some Zen stories told, so I thought I could start with one. And I think this kind of encompasses some of what the theme I want to explore today. And the Zen story begins, as many Zen stories do, in Japan. And with a young man who is quite despondent and unsatisfied with his life. And so he decides, maybe I'll go to the Zen Center and see if I can learn some things about Zen. Maybe that'll help me find more meaning, more purpose in my life. So he goes to the local Zen Center and he meets the abbot. And the abbot says, tell me a little bit about yourself. And the young man starts telling him a little bit about himself. And the Zen Master says, so what are you good at? What are your interests? And the young man says, well, you know, I don't really have any skills. I'm actually quite worthless. I was raised rich and I never had to work. And I really have nothing. You should know there's really nothing I can do very well at all. And the Zen Master says, well, surely there must be something, some interest you have. And the student says, well, I'm pretty good at chess. I've always enjoyed chess. So the Zen Master looks over to his assistant and says, fetch me a chessboard and a very large, sharp sword. The guy's thinking, I understand the chessboard part, but the sword? Like, what's up with that? So the assistant goes back, and he gets the chessboard and the sword. And the Zen Master instructs him and says, you two, the assistant and the young man, are going to play a chess game together. And he holds up the sword. And he says to his assistant, if you lose, I'm going to cut your head off. But don't worry, you're going to be reborn in paradise because of your trust and commitment. And then he looks at the other young man and he says, if you lose, I'm going to cut off your head. And I don't know what's going to happen to you, but you're going to deserve it. You're worthless. If you can't win a single game of chess, what use is there in you? So they're looking at the old man and going, is he for real or what's going on? And he looks serious. He looks like somewhat maniacal, but maniacal Zen master. So they start playing the game. And the young man, budding Zen student's attention is totally focused on the game, because if he loses, he might die. So he's completely present with the game. His attention isn't worried about the past or the future, what his career is going to be, what his project's going to be, this is going to be. Everything is right in the moment. And as such, he can see moves, and he can see where the game is going, and he starts to take the lead. And he's looking like he's going to win in a few moves. And but then it hits him that if he wins, it means the other guy's going to die. And he starts thinking about this other guy and thinks, what enormous courage this young assistant has to play this game and to trust his master that if he cuts off his head, he's going to go to to paradise. And so he begins to have compassion for his opponent. And then he thinks, maybe I should die. I mean, I haven't really had much of a life. I think I'll let him win. So the young man starts intentionally making mistakes so that his opponent can take the advantage. And as he does so, the Zen Master comes and knocks the board off the table. And they both look at him like not sure, what's going to happen. And the Zen Master says, no one's going to die here today. And he said, you learned the two most important lessons about studying Zen. You had complete concentration, and you had complete compassion. Those are the two most essential things. And he says, so come, you can study. And as the story goes, as Zen story goes, everybody gets enlightened in the end. But I tell that story partly because it feels like our world is in a little similar game of life and death. Although the holder of the sword over our head isn't a Zen master. But it's all these challenges that could lead to our destruction, whether it's global warming or poverty or lack of food or lack of water. There's these challenges that are mounting in our world today, and that we can either respond creatively and effectively to them, or we can respond stressfully with anxiety. And so when I talk about stress relief kind of for the creative and constantly connected, I'm talking about those of us who are for sure going to be connected. That's not a question. The question is, are we going to be stressfully connected or creatively connected? Are we going to be consciously connected? Or is our connection going to help us actually address some of these challenges that we're facing, whether it's personal challenges, family challenges, or actually the larger global challenges? And how do we meet that? How do we meet that challenge? And I came to this after years of kind of Buddhist practice and meditation and teaching stress reduction, and then finding myself with kind of what I might call the path of wisdom. And then I found myself completely immersed in technology and social networks and all the cool things that we all know exist. And I found that the more constantly connected I was, the more stressed I was. The harder it was to sleep at night, the more I was kind of anxious, the more I was eating my meals in front of my screen, and harder to digest food. And I just kind of felt the impact on my body in a very kind of negative way. And I began to realize that for me to survive constantly connected, I kind of had to merge my two interest areas. So one would be the path of wisdom, and the other may be the path of technology. And how do those come together? And how can I be like a Zen student in front of my computer and access what we might call Zen mind or beginner's mind or kind of creative mind? And so often when we live very kind of tense or stressed lives, we kind of have this sense that I have to do this. If I don't do this, I'm not going to be nearly as productive, right? That's often a voice that's kind of there. If I slow down, I'm not going to get as much done. And so what I want to present today is, let's say that's not bad, but let's say that's kind of work 1.0. And that there's a potential work 2.0, which is that the more our system is aligned, the more we're connected with ourselves, the more balanced our mind and body and heart is, that more likely the better results we're going to get, and more likely that those results are actually going to be more effective for the world. So that's what I'm going to present. You may not believe that, but just for this next 45 minutes ago, let's kind of hold that possibility, that there is that new, we call it consciousness or whatever we could call it, new kind of pattern that's happening that says that the more that we're aligned and the more our work is aligned, that we're going to create a better world. And that if we're relating from stress and from anxiety and from fear, and we're bringing that energy into our work, most likely the repercussions of that are going to have negative repercussions on our system, on our relationships, on our families, on our work. And so it all comes back again to consciousness, or a word that I like to call consciousness. How aware are we of our state of mind? And so the first tool that I want to offer, I want to kind of offer maybe a handful of tools today for you to think about and consider and maybe use. And one of the first that I realized was the importance of what we may call what's connected. So at first it's really cool, particularly when we get a new technology or new software, that we're connected. We love that there's this technology that connects us. But what's often missed in that is the quality of our state of mind, is the consciousness with which is engaging that. So for example, you can see consciousness is kind of like the power system to any technology. So an iPhone is wonderful, but if it doesn't have a power source, it's kind of a nice paperweight, but it doesn't really do much. And same with any kind of computer or system. It needs a power source that fuels it. And the stronger that power source is, the more that technology can do. And if we look at ourselves, often we're relating, or I should say I, and I think others, relating to technology in a way in which the power source is not very strong. The consciousness with which we're engaging is actually quite low. So as such, we're not able to get as much done. We're not able to be as more effective. So rather than focusing on that, or on that we're engaged, one of the tools is to focus on what's engaged. What is our state of mind in this moment? Is it anxiety? Is it fear? Is it restlessness? Is it worry that if we don't do this, our manager is going to get on us and upset and competitive? Or is it calm, and is it ease, and is it clarity? How are we approaching our work? When we sit down, are we sitting down like this? Or are we sitting down like this? And open to the kind of creative energy that's happening. And that I found in my life, the more I connected, the more I can notice it as soon as I get a cell call, or as soon as I get an email, and my energy around it was habitual. And that as such, I was getting less done. So the first tool I want to offer is this kind of interest in what's engaged, particularly when you feel like your attention is low and you're working. What is it that's engaged? Not in a way of judging what's engaged, but just inquiring, what's the state of my mind? What's the power source? What's the level of the power source that's engaged right now? And then once we become aware of that, we can make whatever changes feel necessary. We could go for a walk, we could go get some food, we could do a variety of different things that would then feed the power source such that our work is more productive and effective. However, often when I do these talks and when I talk to people about this subject, there's often this confusion sometimes between what we might call consciousness and then what we might call the judging mind. So for example, I'm sure there's all of us have some patterns that we might not find that skillful. So maybe we eat a lot of Dorito nacho cheese chips while we're working on the computer. Or maybe we drink 5 cappuccinos a day, and it doesn't quite feel right. And so the change that I'm talking about is how do we make a change to a more conscious relationship, but that change happen through what I might call awareness rather than change through judgment. So for example, if we're working and we notice that we're doing a particular pattern, often the judging mind comes in and says, that's bad, you shouldn't do that. And then we might stop that pattern for a while, right? And think, okay, I'm good now, I'm meditating or I'm doing these things. And then so all of a sudden we've gone from a bad person to a good person. But inevitably that shifts. And then we go back and we kind of go back and forth between this good pattern and bad pattern. So the one other tool that can be useful is to think of change through awareness. And so what might this mean? One thing that this might mean is what the Buddha had said, that if you're once you realize how painful it is to hold on to something, you'll let it go. So let's say you're holding on to a burning ember. Once you realize how painful it is to hold on to that, you'll let it go. Now, someone can come up to you and say, research shows that people who hold burning embers in their hand, after 5 years, have this kind of, and they can show your brain holding a burning ember, and they can tell you, well, my friend held it. But the real change happens is when you feel that, and you feel the pain of it, and you want to let it go. It's not because you're bad because you're holding it and good because you don't, but because it lets go on itself. And it lets go because you're more sensitive to the process, because you're more aware of where your mind-body state is. So often when I talk about this kind of consciousness, what I'm talking about is a greater kind of sensitivity rather than a judging mind. So the judging mind comes in and says you're bad because, I don't know, I want to use the example of coffee. I don't care if someone drinks however many cups of coffee they want, but I know that for some people that's something that feels like, it's not that it's bad that we drink whatever coffee we drink, but it feels like there's an inner alignment that either actions have or they don't have, So for someone, that inner alignment may be, you know what, it feels good to have 2 cups of coffee, but they notice themselves drinking 7. And so there's this friction in their life. Or they notice themselves, we all have these kind of patterns. Often it's around eating, or it's around putting 12-hour days in on the computer. So we have these patterns, and so then how do we shift these patterns? And so at least from the Buddha's perspective, how you shift them is you pay attention to what's happening in the moment you're holding that pattern. Does that make sense? You feel the burning ember in your hand. And then the letting go happens not because our mind is telling us let this go. It's our whole body, our whole system telling us to let this go. So in this kind of consciousness that we're talking about, it's not a matter of judging ourselves, of trying to be a good person in the sense of You see this a lot with sometimes people who maybe live very unconsciously, and then all of a sudden they be a conscious person. But the conscious person becomes more of an identity than actually a lived experience. So they start dressing like a conscious person, talking like a conscious person. They start kind of taking on a certain mode. And rather than that, rather than kind of change by identity, one of the more powerful ways is to let the change happen through this kind of deepening of consciousness, of actually feeling what's happening in that moment. So it's not like, don't do this. Do this with awareness, and then see what it feels like. And then tune into your system and to see if, does that feel genuine, or does it feel like some other kind of change wants to come from that? Does that kind of make sense? So it's we could call it a change through awareness, rather than a change through judgment. Because often people will begin, as they begin to get more conscious or more aware of their actions, they actually become more judgmental of themselves. How could you be eating that at that time? How could you be doing this? How could you da-da-da-da-da-da? And so in this process, I think we want to be aware of how that judging mind works, and that rather than kind of staying there, to move to a deeper knowing that's based on consciousness, so that our whole system actually makes the changes that we want to make. So in this tool, or in these kind of tools that I want to offer, what matters is the energy in which we're approaching our tasks. So often when we think of stress relief, or we think of anything stressful, people say, yeah, you know what's stressful is my colleague. You know, he's never on time. He's never doing things the way he's supposed to do. That's stressful. If I could just get him to change, that's stress relief. Or my system just keeps malfunctioning. Da, da, da. If I could get my system, my computer, my network to change, then I would have stress relief. Or they would think some other kind of exterior event. If I can just get this person to do this differently, you know, I would be fine. And another way to approach it, and this is kind of the Buddha's perspective too, where he said that nothing can hurt you more. Nothing, no amount of angry customers or rude emails or anything can hurt you more than your own mind, your own thoughts. Nothing causes us more stress than our own thoughts, he said. And he also said that nothing actually can bring us more happiness than our own thoughts. No fame, no amount of wealth, no amount of esteem, no amount of anything that we can imagine can actually bring us more satisfaction than our own thoughts. And so when I kind of think of stress relief, what I think about is this way in which we're conscious of the thoughts that we bring in, and we hold them differently. So for example, let's say that anger arises in someone. You know, you're stressed, you're frustrated, and all of a sudden that anger arises. In terms of stress relief, the anger is actually not the problem, or not the issue. The issue is how that is held. And one image that's often used is if you imagine a couple drops of blue dye, and if you put this blue dye in a cup of water, what happens to the cup? The cup turns blue. And if you put this same blue dye and you put it in an ocean, a vast ocean, what happens to the ocean? Nothing. Quality is the same. Dye is the same. State of mind is the same. The container is vastly different. And the less impact there's less impact on the ocean because the volume is so large. And the same is actually true with a lot of the qualities that lead to our stress. It's not fear, it's not anger, it's how that anger is held. So for example, one person can have the quality of anger in their mind, and all of a sudden be absorbed and completely immersed and lost in the anger and yelling and people and complaining to people and just making a havoc. Or, which is what we call reaction. Or the other way is sometimes anger will rise in someone, and the person, because it counters their identity of themselves, they'll push it away. And they'll say, no, I'm not angry. I'm fine. And yet the anger's still there. So we could say that in that, when there's little space for our experience, we have what we might call cup mind. Right? There's a quality that's existing, and that we're relating to it in a very small way. Another way we could say is that same state arises, and all of a sudden we allow space for it. We allow it to be. There's anger present. We see it. We allow it. And that through this, there still may be a challenge, but all of a sudden the level of our stress lessens because we're no longer fighting what's true that given moment. but we're allowing it and we're bringing awareness to it. So we could say that actually we created more space. So one way to look at stress relief is not so much how do I decrease all this stuff from coming my way, but actually how am I holding that? How am I carrying that? So often the energy that what Daniel Goleman calls destructive emotions, or maybe we call stressful emotions, make, is in part how we either resist or react to them. So for example, let's say that you're going to give a big presentation in front of a group. And you go into it and you think, I'm gonna be completely confident and I'm going to be completely fearless. And I'm just going to give my presentation and I'm going to do great. And then often what happens is that we resist a certain quality, right? So often people think that to be fearless is to actually have a mind where fear does not arise, right? So they say, I'm going to go in and I'm not going to let fear arise. I'm going to look confident. And essentially what happens is we become afraid of qualities of mind. So in this sense, we become afraid of fear. So it's actually not fear that's a problem. It's our fear of fear that's a problem, if that makes sense. It's our resisting, so that when we do give that speech, if fear does arise, it's a huge issue. There's very little space for it. Rather than, I'm going to present, and I'm just going to be open to what is, and I'm going to be a container that can hold whatever happens. If fear rises, if anger rises, if whatever quality arises, I'm actually going to be a container that can hold that. So as you walk in to give that presentation, one way would be to walk in and to be trying to prevent fear from arising. As such, we become afraid of fear, essentially. Another one is to actually not be afraid of fear. And this, what I would offer would be actually the more true confidence or true fearlessness. It's not a mind in which fear never enters, but it's a mind that once fear does enter it, it doesn't have, it's met in an ocean rather than a cup. And thus the stress and the impact that it has is actually less, is minimal. If that is kind of making any sense. So when we think of stress relief, we're sure it really helps to get our colleague to put things on time, to get someone else, our manager, to stop talking to us so meanly, and to get all these things to happen. This is wonderful, if we can do it. But inevitably what it comes down to is our own mind, body, and heart, and to the degree that we're relating to that situation. And one of the things that can be very helpful is this quality of presence or consciousness. So let's say that, let's have a morning, let's say you wake up one morning and all of a sudden, almost before your foot touches the ground, you're hit with your to-do list, right? This happens to all of us, I'm sure. You've got to call this person, you've got to finish that report, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And all of a sudden, just before our foot even touches the ground on the way to the bathroom, the to-do list comes in and begins to kind of absorb us. So we hurry up, we're kind of feeling like this sense of behind. I've got to hurry up, I got to kind of deal with my to-do list. I got to catch up, I got to do. And so as such, we bring this energy into our work. So when we're doing our to-do list, when we call that person that customer that we need to call, when we call that person on the phone, and you can feel this too when other people have this energy, there's this weight to the conversation. There's this sense of do you know how many things I've got to do? We've got to hurry up. We've got to make this happen fast because I've got all these other things going on. And so what happens is we kind of bring this to-do list around with us wherever we go. And when we bring it into our conversations, it actually adds kind of an extra weight or an extra tension to the conversations. And so as such, the conversations don't go as well. So it actually takes us longer to complete our to-do list because the energy that we're bringing into that to-do list is so heavy. So one of the ways to try and counter this is there's this old story about a samurai. And the samurai had all these skills that he was felt quite good about. He could defeat 100 men in battle, and he could jump from the ground up to on top of a building, and he had all these great powers that he had developed in his years. But he kept hearing about this Zen Master, again a Zen Master, who lived down the way that everyone was always talking about with such esteem and admiration. So he's thinking, but I'm this tough samurai. What's up with this little monk? Why is he getting all the attention when I should get all the attention because of all the great things I can do? So one day he decides to go and talk to the monk to see, like, why is your reputation so good? So he goes in to talk to the monk, or to the Zen Master, and he starts going through the list of all the powers he has. Did you know I can defeat 100 people in battle? Did you know I can jump on top of buildings and I can do all these amazing feats? He says, well, what can you do? You know, what are your powers? What makes you so cool? And the Zen Master, as the story goes, replies, when I eat, I just eat. When I walk, I just walk. When I talk, I just talk. And that skill is actually probably one of the more challenging skills that we can all have. Is that when we're doing something, what is the level, again, of consciousness that we're bringing to that action? Are we walking, just walking? Or are we walking with our to-do list and doing 10 other things at once? And no judgment on it, you know, in terms of however we want to live. But if we're looking at kind of this whole field of consciously connected, then that really matters. What's the level of consciousness we're bringing to the action? It doesn't mean that there's a kind of like God of the internet or of technology that says this is bad and this, you know, there's like a list of good and bads. But there's this sense that as our attention becomes more and more distracted with all these different things we're doing at the same time, there's actually less presence that we actually bring to the rest of our life. So if we bring what we might call scattered mind, if scattered mind is really present during the day, we'll probably really notice it at night when we try to go to bed. And the thing about scattered mind is if you tell it to shut up, it doesn't really shut up. If you've tried this before. You're trying to go to sleep and the mind is just kind of racing with its to-do list and all those things. You say, shut up. You know, and it doesn't follow that. We can't quite command it in that same way, shut up. But often we experience that kind of scattered or caffeine mind or anxious mind at night because it actually kind of stayed with us during the day, because it was cultivated and it continued during the day. So even though we can take something at night that might help us ease it, the real challenge is to actually address it in the day. So I have a little tool that I want to offer around this. And the tool is called Expand Time. And I discovered this tool because I was realizing how many nights I was going to sleep and I had that state of mind with me. And I was realizing, like, how did this happen during the day? When did this come about? And I realized a lot of it was in my relationship to time. And you might say, I have a relationship with time? I didn't even know. So my relationship to time is the way that I describe it. Say you're having a really busy day. Tons of things you need to do, tons of lists in your head, and you're just about to walk to a meeting and someone stops you in the hall and says, oh, can I have 2 minutes? I just need 2 minutes of your time. Now, how do we relate to this person? They just need 2 minutes of our time. Let's say that we have 2 minutes. So one way that we can relate to this person is to think, Jesus, I have so little time already. Why are you trying to take my time? Okay, and we say, okay, sure, I've got 2 minutes, hurry up. The consciousness that we're bringing to that situation, hurry up, yeah, is such that during those 2 minutes, we're probably not likely to take in much of what that person says, and we're probably not be able to hear or actually address the situation. Because how we're viewing them is we're viewing as someone taking away our time, as kind of a distraction that shouldn't be happening. And so time in that sense becomes actually quite narrow, because our state of mind becomes quite narrow. And another way would be if we had 2 minutes and that person comes up and says, can I have 2 minutes? And then you say, yeah, please, I've got a full 2 minutes. and there's a softening, and there's an allowing, and there's an opening. The 2 minutes hasn't changed at all. There's not like, but we could say you've expanded time within the time that you have. So rather than those 2 minutes being, yeah, hurry up, yeah, okay, hurry up. And then you walk with that mindset to your meeting, and it's hurry up at the meeting, and hurry up at home, and hurry up to dinner, and hurry up, and hurry up. And then you get to bed and say, hurry up and go to sleep. And the mind says, what? So rather than kind of continuing that pattern, what would it be like during the day, rather than that tightening around those moments? Come on, can I have this? Yeah, I got 2 full minutes. Here I am for those 2 full minutes. And to change our orientation to those kinds of events during the day, so actually that what we cultivate is the quality of patience and ease. And so after that 2-minute discussion, when we show up at our meeting to discuss topics with our colleagues, what shows up? It's more likely going to be, if patience and awareness was present in the interruption, most likely patience and awareness is going to be present at the meeting to discuss ideas. But it all kind of happens when there's something happening often, and we at first we want to fight it, and we want to say, no, you know, we want to kind of like tell the person, why are you trying to take away my time? And it could be actually, and sometimes we actually don't have any time. But how do we say we don't have any time? I don't have any time? I do not have any time. And the two ways are vastly different, and it'll depend, and that will actually, how we relate to that moment is actually how we're going to relate to the moment when we're going to bed at night. And this is also very true for interruptions, if you've noticed. It's that you're working really hard and you're trying to do something and you're like, all right, I'm getting stuff done, and all of a sudden an interruption happens. And at first the interruption's like, damn it, why are you interrupting me? You know, at least with me, it's like if I'm working, like, damn it, why are you interrupting me? And I'll deal with the interruption, but it'll be with damn it. And then when I return back to bring my attention to the work, damn it, it's still there. You know, I brought it back with me. And the more that I with the interruption, and the interruption happens, and I see that my job my job isn't to do more. My job isn't to make more things happen. My job is actually to respond creatively to whatever is. So if my job is to respond creatively to whatever is, that interruption isn't a mistake of the universe. It shouldn't be happening. It's an opportunity to respond creatively to what is. So if I respond creatively to what is, and when that interruption happens, the question I'm asking is, it's not, leave me the hell alone, why are you doing this? It's how do I respond creatively to you? How do I relate to this in a creative way? And I find that the more that I bring that energy into the interruption, first of all, the sooner the issue is solved, the need that they have is solved. But more importantly, when I then bring my attention back to my work, I'm building what we might call a creative momentum. So the momentum that I've started in the day is creative, creative, creative. And so when I go to my work, guess what's present? It's more creative. Now, if I start the day and I start with frustration, 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 when I sit down in front of my computer and push the power button on, most likely what's going to be present is frustration. And it might take a while for that frustration to subside, but that's going to be this, each moment conditions the next. So if I really care about my state of mind, then whatever is, whether it's an interruption or someone asking me for my time, that my ability to creatively respond to that moment conditions how I'm going to respond creatively to every other moment in the day. So that's why, in the sense of in some ways, our idea of what it means to be creative or productive and useful actually get in the way of us being productive and useful, because then we label things and we don't necessarily pay attention to what's the energy that's coming, what's the energy that I'm bringing. And so what interests me is how these two worlds, both the sense of when we're kind of stressed, but then also in the sense of productivity and what we may call creative mind or Zen mind, sometimes beginner's mind, the relationship between these two. And the possibility that as our system is more aligned and as our mind and body and heart are more aligned, that actually we can access what we might call the creative mind better in our work, that it shows up more. You know, and so most of us have some work that involves creativity. We're not just sticking pegs together, you know, we're creating products, we're dealing with customers, we're working on teams, and that there's some element of this, they call it the zone in sports, you know, sometimes, but this feeling of how much creative energy is in this moment. How much am I accessing this kind of intuitive or creative knowing? And that these two have a relationship. And as stress decreases, the other increases. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of what we might call this creative or Zen mind or beginner's mind. And years ago, I was interviewing this guy named George Mumford, who George is kind of, if you had to put a title on to him, he's probably like someone called teacher of the zone. So he worked with Michael Jordan and those guys in the Chicago Bulls when they're in their championship area, when Coach Jackson was with them. And then he moved with them, and he worked with Kobe and Shaq and them when they played for the Lakers during their championship era. And so what they would bring George to do is they would bring in George to actually do somewhat of this, is to look at the mental state in which players engage in the game. Because Coach Jackson knew that he could have the greatest player who's physically fit and can jump high and can do all these great things. But if that player's mind isn't in the game, if his presence isn't in the game, then they're pretty useless. One little shot and all of a sudden they get off. And he knew that what's important was actually what they call being in the zone. So this guy Mumford would come in, George Mumford would come in, and he would do a short meditation sometimes before the game. And he would work on this kind of quality of ease and say, how do we be more in the flow in the game? And when I was talking to him and interviewing him, I said, so how do you work with the players? He says, well, the first thing I tell them is if you try to get in the zone, if you try to get in the zone, you can't. So of course the players would be like, what? I mean, we're hiring you to come tell me how to get in the zone. You're telling me don't try? He says, if you try to get in the zone, you can't. You may have noticed this. You're behind on a project, and you're like, all right, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna be creative. I'm gonna produce. I'm gonna, and you're going there and you're kind of psyching yourself up. That when actually you sit down, it doesn't guarantee that access to that state. So I said, well, if you don't tell them to not, if you say if you try to get in the zone you can't, what do you do with them, right? And he says, I can't remember his exact words, but he says, if you're present, the zone happens as a byproduct. If you try to get in the zone, you can't. But if you're present, the zone happens as a byproduct. So what is this presence? So this presence would be if a player is on the court, and the same is true for, I would think, a player on the court or us in front of our computer. But if a player is on the court and he's thinking, I need to get in the zone, I have to get in the zone, where is that zone, I need to be in the zone, da-da-da-da-da, all this kind of mental activity, adding mental activity to the situation, that distances us actually from the creative mind. And that if a player is on the court and they're aware of their body, and they feel their breath, and they're aware of sounds, and they're there in a quality of presence, then what we might call the zone or the creative mind or the Zen mind is more likely, is kind of more inviting to come through. So if we try to be in the zone, we can't. But through presence, the zone happens more often as a byproduct. So I'll just offer that to you, and you can explore and experiment yourself. Walk up to your computer, and think, I'm going to get in the zone, I'm going to get in the zone, all right, I'm going to do this. And do that, and then walk up to your computer in the sense of presence. So in the presence, how would we sit if we were present? I don't know, just kind of explore. If I was to bring presence to my work this next hour, what would that look like? Okay, I might sit this way or I might sit that way. How would my breath be? What is my direct experience in front of this computer? And see what that might be like for an hour just as a test. What would it be like to bring presence into our actions? And since a lot of our actions is with computers, and mine too, I spend much of my day looking at a screen, then how does this presence get expressed in there? And so it's not a matter of, we could say that it's actually a matter of a balance with effort. So there's an old story about this young man. And he decides that he's going to be the greatest martial artist in the whole land. And so he tells his parents, and his parents say, okay. And he hears about this teacher way off in the north of Japan, who's supposedly the teacher of teachers. If you're going to be the greatest, you got to study with him. So he goes to, the story goes, he's on a train for 3 days, and he's on a bus for 3 days, and he has to hike up a mountain for 3 days, and he has to do all this stuff. So finally he arrives to meet with this teacher, great martial arts teacher. And the martial arts teacher says, what do you want to learn? And the student says, I want to be the greatest martial artist in the area, in the whole country. And he says, okay. He says, how long must I study? He asks the teacher. And the guy says, oh, to be the best, it's 7 years at least, minimum 7 years. And the student's thinking, 7 years? Like, I was kind of hoping to get this done in maybe 5, I got other things I want to do with my life. So he says, what if I work twice as hard as everybody else? And Zen Master says, then it'll take you about 15 years. And the student says, what if I work twice as hard and day and night? And he says, probably about 30 years then. And the student's, it's like perplexed. And he's like, why is it that every time I tell you I'll work harder, you tell me it'll take longer? And the teacher says, the answer is simple. with one eye focused on the destination, there's only one eye left to find the way. And so what we could say is the student in the story had a great deal of effort, right? But we could say the effort's actually just kind of one side of the coin. That the other side of coin is what we might call patience. And that the two kind of balance each other out. And when we talk about being in the zone, whether in the zone on our computer, in the zone, or in the basketball court, it's not just trying, it's not just effort that actually determines the success or not a success of it, but the quality of that effort. Is that effort coming with a patient effort? Is there a balance of these two qualities? And so if you explore this in your work, and explore sometimes when you're feeling frustrated and it's just not happening, what needs to happen? Do you have too much effort and you need more patience? That's usually my case. Or is there actually too little patience and not enough effort? Is there too little kind of sitting around and not enough effort that you're kind of bringing to it? But that these two qualities, when we think of kind of engaging the creative mind, can be very helpful just to inquire. What's present now? What's the quality of my effort? Is my effort strained? Or is my effort, and thinking that with this, and often when the effort is strained, there's some story we're telling ourselves. When I finish this, this is going to be, and the story usually has a really happy ending or a really horrible ending. But this is going to bring me or do me or help, so my manager is just going to think the world of me, or my manager is going to hate me, or there's some story that's often around our effort. And what would it be like to drop the story and to really put our attention in the process, to put two eyes into the process, so that actually we're less kind of back and forth between the past and the future, and we're more with the process as it's happening. And this is kind of what they're beginning to learn in sports, and I think it's really the same true for all of us who are working in any capacity, is that there's this balancing of effort and patience that's needed, and then there's this quality of consciousness that we can bring. And if we can bring that into it, our systems change, our businesses change, and hopefully our world will change, because it was infused with this consciousness and this quality of attention. And then from that, everything, who knows what the world, but we can actually change the system in very positive ways through our, and it all starts though with the attention that we're bringing to our actions. So I see that there's a hand up. I have no idea how much time we've spent or how much time we have, but go ahead.
So, it seems we have to have at least some attention towards a goal. Otherwise, if we're in the basketball mode, I'm in the zone, I'm dribbling really well. I'm completely in the zone dribbling.
Yeah. And
everyone's standing there watching, waiting for me to actually dribble down the court and take the shot, because the goal is, there is a goal that I am actually in this process too.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense on how to balance the process versus the goal of the process?
Yeah. My experience, I guess I don't need the mic. My experience is that some of it, to me, in my experience, is around how much of what I call there's a story around the event. So if I'm doing this, and of course we have to produce, right, for our managers and other people, we have results that we're seeking. And so that's very true. And yet, the more I can hold that without visiting that, the more likely I can actually stay attuned to the process. But if half my attention is on what's going to happen when the results, what a great player I'm going to be and what the world's going to think of me, that has a different energy about it, versus rather than this is my goal and I'm going to stay focused on the goal. But I think that's a good point. But so the goal would still be present, but I think our energy would be more directed towards actually reaching it, and less directed towards the story that we're telling ourselves of what's going to happen when we do. And that story happens, I mean, you may know, we all tell each other, we tell ourselves, I mean, we love to read the top news stories, of course, on whatever news site we do, whether it's Dig or Yahoo or whatever, or Google News. But we also have our own stories that we tell ourselves, of course, our own top stories. Our top stories about who or what we're going to become and who or what we're going to be. And it's those stories sometimes, I think, that can get in the way of our kind of creative process, because our creative process really needs room to flow and to expand beyond whatever our hopes or fears might be. Any other questions? Yeah.
So you're saying, if you're concentrating this energy and so forth, but I find it very takes a lot of energy to concentrate the way you're talking. So it seems like it's kind of a chicken and egg problem of getting there.
Yeah.
Have any comment to make on that?
Yeah. Well, I see it as like if you have there's water flowing down a path, and the water is going to go where there's the least blockage, right? The gravity is going to take it, and it's just going to find whatever crevices there's the least blockage. And initially, where it flows the easiest is maybe down patterns and down pathways that there's the least blockage, but it's actually not that helpful. So initially, it's actually more work to create the pathway that we feel more aligned with, that we actually feel more helpful with. So it feels like there's more work because that pathway hasn't been attended to, let's say. But that over time, the more that pathway is attended to, the more the water just naturally kind of flows there in the beginning. But that's why, like the example of the burning ember I gave before, is that some people begin to feel this, and they feel like that it should be pleasant all the time, you know, and that it's not that the work, at least in my perspective, is opening up those channels, and so over time those channels become more fluid for the water to go through. But initially, if that path hasn't been worked on, there's going to be a lot of blockage, weeds you need to pull out, rocks to remove. But over time, that works. And again, it works but sometimes that can happen is it's not a quality of should or a pressure, and I don't know what you're feeling in those moments, but that's another thing that can happen is that people kind of feel like, I need to be creative, I have to try to be creative, I have to try to be calm. And of course, trying to be calm is just usually much more tense. You know, I gotta try, I gotta bring it, rather than I'm just gonna allow and flow. So I don't know if that's helpful at all. But if we see it, that's kind of how I see it. It's just opening those channels. And it takes some work to open those channels. But in the end, the time that if we can open those channels, if we can think that our system is going to do better, we're going to sleep better, we're going to eat better, we're going to feel better about ourselves, then we're going to, more and more that's going to come into our work, I think. Any other thoughts or questions or anything?
So at the beginning, you talked about change through awareness instead of change through what was the other
Judgment.
Judgment, and you gave the example of the burning ember in your hand, which actually hurts you, and you want to drop it. But for your other example of drinking 7 cups of coffee a day, for instance, that doesn't really hurt you. Doesn't instinctively make you feel bad and want to drop it, right? How do you gain this awareness?
Okay, so one way would be. So for me, there's like 2 different voices that often appear. So if, let's say, I have my hand over a fire, and as the heat comes up, there's just this voice that says, "Move your hand," you know, because I can feel the heat, and it's just this voice that's just like, this is just what needs to happen in this moment. Move your hand, and it feels like it's not a voice that says you're bad if you hold your hand there. You really shouldn't hold your hand. You know, it's not that kind of a voice. It's just a voice that's like, move your hand, and so there's that voice. And then there's that other voice that's more of a berating or more of a judgmental voice. So often when people say to me, well, I should stop doing this action, what I generally say to them is, why don't you just be present for the action? So for someone, drinking 7 cups of coffee could be fine. I don't make any judgment on that. But for people who say, it doesn't feel right for me to drink 7 cups of coffee, then I would say bring more awareness to that process. So feel what it's like. After drinking the 7 cups of coffee, take the time to actually tune into that. Is it painful, and is it not? So how we might do that would be just to sit with ourselves and bring attention to our body. How's this sitting in my stomach? What is my state of mind? What is the direct experience of this? And then from that, see if some change wants to happen. Does that make sense? Somewhat? But it's through a full experience of that, and then the system. It's not your mind. The system just feels like life wants to move in this direction, rather than a good bad, you know, the whole good bad thing, that it's bad to do this and it's good to do that. So another tool that we can, I know we're kind of late on time, but one tool that I want to offer is and this was a tool when the guy I was telling you about worked with the Lakers and stuff. Often what he would have them do is what was called mindfulness of breathing. So even if you just kind of sit now, you don't have to change your posture or anything, but just feel your breath as it comes and goes. You don't need to change it. You don't need to do anything about it. But all of a sudden, you're kind of tapping into your body. And for most of us, we're in our heads most of the day, as I am too. And that's a great intelligence source. There's wonderful things the mind and the brain can do. But we also have an intelligence source in our body. It's always nice to have multiple forms of intelligence. And so by catching into the breath, even just a couple times a day, all of a sudden we're accessing another level of intelligence. So all of a sudden you're going to get your coffee and you're waiting in line. And you're frustrated, why is this line so long? Ah, the breath. What are we cultivating in that moment? And we always have something that we can actually come back to. We're waiting for our computer to boot. Somewhere we're waiting. And so we don't actually have to set up more time in our life, but we can actually use that time. And one effective way is just to tune into the breath. You're working on your computer. You're frustrated with how the project's going. You can feel the difference. I can feel the difference, just as we're doing it now. You're aware of the breath, but you're also aware of the environment. And sometimes that really helps to kind of come back from kind of a this to a more kind of spacious awareness.
So as we practice mindfulness and we're looking at our goals, a place that I get stuck is the goal is out in the future, and yet mindfulness is here in the present. Mm-hmm. And life then seems like a series of goals that are out there in the future and trying to bring it back to the present. And so I don't know what your
I play with that one too. One of the phrases that I use is this moment's never going to get any better. And I like that phrase because my mind hates it. This moment's never going to get any better. Is what I often play with. What if this moment was it? This is it. There's like, and then often the condition of no, this can't be it. The it happens when I get this position, I get this, I get that, I get whatever the story is. What if this moment actually was it? Now, from that, there's still goals and things that we can achieve, but can we work towards them from a sense of fullness rather than lack? And that's kind of what I find most interesting and why that phrase really helps me. This moment's never going to get any better. Now, on the surface level, this moment could get quite better. If we have pain, at the surface level, another moment could be free of pain, and we could say that that's better. But what if at the very foundation, nothing changes? And you can talk to this if you talk to people who've made billions or who've done these things. There's something that changes with all the money and fame and everything else, and there's something that doesn't change at all. Or people who've had great illness and great tragedy, there's something that changes, and there's something that never changes. And if we can tap into that which never changes, then it feels like our movement to create things and to do things come from fullness and expression and fun and creativity rather than a feeling of like lack. So that's how I work with that. And I don't know, that phrase, this moment's never going to get any better, works for me. It reminds me to kind of come back and go, oh, right. This moment, if this talk goes wonderfully or poorly, this moment's never going to get any better. Or if this whatever, it goes wonderfully or poorly, this moment's never going to. And so I find that very actually helpful. So you can take that if you want.
This sort of leads into what you were saying, which is I have a chronic pain condition, and my experience is that when I start being mindful of my body, the pain gets worse. Mm. And so to function on a daily basis, I have to sort of shunt the pain to one side. Mm-hmm. But it does get in the way of meditation. And I know a Zen Master would say, experience the pain, be the pain, but that's a lot of pain to be. Do you have any thoughts? Yeah.
I've also had various physical challenges and ailments in my life. And one of the things, again, I noticed is how much the judging mind can actually then come in, too, and say you should be doing this, or you should be more mindful, or you should be able to solve this. So for me, it's been very helpful to be aware of that voice, and then to work with whatever I can work with. And I was interested when I heard this talk recently to this guy, Eckhart Tolle, who I was listening to. And he talked about the importance of actually going out in nature and just getting life energy from nature and feeling like positive, bringing kind of positive energy into our life. And I realized that's something that I've actually found very helpful, is that can I be out in nature and can I bring kind of positive energy into my system? But in terms of like the pain when it's happening, I think one thing is to be very mindful of the energy in which is coming at it. And can there be a quality of acceptance, and even though it may sound strange, actually a quality of forgiveness to it, you know? That the self-hatred around someone who's as someone who is in pain, the frustration and the anger that I'm in pain, that often is actually more painful than actually the pain. Is a story of you shouldn't be in pain, how could you be, you should have solved this by now, you know, all that is actually the real pain of the pain. And that when I can be aware of that and see and let that go by, and then it's more manageable for me. Any other last ones before? Yeah.
You were talking earlier on one of the sort of Zen Master stories where you're saying, like, when I eat, I eat. When I walk. What are your thoughts of how that can fit in with lifestyle? Like I think a lot of us have is, and I'm trying to get an answer a little bit fuller than there's balance, because I know that frustrates the heck out of me. When I can sort of, if I can achieve that when I walk, it means that I don't have enough physical time in a day to take care of some other things. So I think we're sort of forced with, we're probably all trying to do more than we can in a day, and that's where the balance answer comes in. But I don't think we can achieve both. That, how can I productively use that walking time to calmly take care of some of these other things I have to do, rather than be, you know, I don't want to be a Zen master, I want to be as good as I can at what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And how do we combine those two?
Yeah. I think it's an art. I have a few ideas, but I think it's an art, and I think it's what we're all creating. I think what we're all creating is we're tired of a stressful, connected life. We don't want that anymore, and yet we're not willing to let go and go to the woods and retire in a hut. So somehow we got to come together and say, let's marry these two. Let's be consciously connected, and what is that going to look like? And so, and I feel like that's kind of what's emerging in this world now, is all of us saying, we want this. It's not enough to be connected. We want consciousness to be connected with us. Now saying that, some tools that I helpful with is one is how I begin and end a day. So the middle of my day may be totally stressful and I can't really do much about it. It's really hard to bring consciousness in. There's all these deadlines. But what I can usually do is I can make the first hour and the last hour conscious. So when I wake up in the morning, what's my first thought? Who sent me email? What do I got to do? Or is my first thought, what's my state of mind? And can I spend that first hour doing whatever practices you feel, whether it's a walk, meditation, or whatever you feel like is helpful? And then can I spend that last hour doing the same thing? I turn off the technology. I turn off any kind of sensory input. I don't spend that time absorbing and taking in more information. I actually spend that time working on the container. So for example, we often think of ourselves as like just information, throw as much information in there and maybe something will stick. And it's almost like pouring the best wine in a glass that has a hole in it. It just goes right out because the container isn't conducive to hold it. And I feel like that's something that happens a lot in our society, is like we're throwing stuff in, and the container actually has a hole in it. So to spend that first hour and that last hour addressing the container, and however that would look, whether it's reading some books, but make sure that those times add that quality, and then to trust that naturally that's going to infiltrate your day in certain ways. And you're an experimenter. We're creating this together. But I do know that that's something we can all do. We can make that first hour and that last hour, and then we can see what creative ways you find, to bring it in. And then you can also just find one task. So let's say you walk to the bathroom every day. I'm going to walk to the bathroom, and I'm going to walk to the bathroom. This is going to be my one task. When I walk to the bathroom, I'm going to walk to the bathroom. I'm going to just walk. So it's not like I've got to do this all the time. But there's maybe one or two experiences. Before I eat my food, I'm going to take 3 breaths. And I'm going to stabilize. So that what eats is not the hurried mind, but that the hurried mind just kind of subsides for a minute. So 3 breaths, and then I'm going to eat my food. And what that does is it just kind of reconditions that energy that's kind of like this towards an energy that's a little bit different. So that could be helpful. Yeah, but you're on the. I feel like we're all creating this sense together. There's a lot of us who are kind of coming together and kind of saying, all right, we want to be connected and we want to be conscious, and what does this all look like for us to do it together? So thank you. We're going to have some lunch, and I'm going to be around and spend the day here, I think. So if you see me, I'm happy to talk. But thank you for coming, because I know that my guess is there was two voices when you thought of coming to this event. The one voice said, you've got so much to do, you don't have time for it. And the other voice said, yeah, you might be able to use that. So I'm thankful that you listened to the one voice, and I hope both voices found information to be helpful.
Thanks.